We're counting down 25 foods British families ate to survive 1970s winters. The hearty one-pot staple of northwest England, Lancashire hot pot was built for long winter nights when little fuel and even less money were available. Traditionally composed of lamb or mutton stacked with onions and topped with thin rounds of potato, the dish would bake slowly in a low oven or even a bakery oven while the workers of Lancashire's textile mills slogged away. Its origins lie deep in the 19th century Industrial Revolution, when cheap cuts and hardy root vegetables became the backbone of working-class meals. In the context of a 1970s winter, the hot pot offered everything a family needed: minimal preparation, maximum warmth, and leftovers for days. The melted fat from the meat, the sweating onions, and the potato lid that sealed in the steam all combined into a dish that could still be piping hot hours later. Leftovers could be heated share and share style. It was comfort, economy, and endurance on one plate. Pickled red cabbage or beetroot often accompanied it, offering a bright contrast to the deep, meaty richness. In a decade of power cuts and escalating costs, the hot pot represented what food could do when you had little but still demanded warmth and sustenance. Scouse is the stew that became a badge of identity for the people of Liverpool. Beef or lamb with potatoes, carrots, and onions, cooking slowly into a thick, satisfying bowl full of flavor and history. The name traces back to lobscouse, a sailor's dish eaten across northern Europe, brought ashore into Liverpool kitchens in the 18th and 19th centuries. In the 1970s, as winters grew harsher and income tighter, scouse stood out as a smart choice. Whatever meat was available, even leftover, combined with hearty vegetables and simmered into one pot. Often made on Sundays, then reheated for the rest of the week, it was the kind of meal that worked when both fuel and fresh meat were limited. Some households sent the pot to the bread oven, returning later to find it bubbling away. The starch from the potatoes thickened. Broth, turning it into something more substantial than a regular stew. In Liverpool, the dish became so central that locals are nicknamed scousers. Today, the memory of scouse still evokes foggy docks, drizzly winters, and the smell of a kitchen that refused to give in to austerity. From the coalfields and shipyards of northeast England came panacelty, a casserole made for lean times. The basic formula: sliced potatoes layered with onions, sometimes bacon or leftover meat, often a tin of corned beef when fresh meat was scarce, all baked slowly over low heat. In 1970s Britain, this dish fitted perfectly into the winter survival kit. Cheap store-cupboard ingredients, minimal fuss, and a long bake that meant heat could be switched off or used sparingly. Many local families passed the dish down. Monday night panacelty used Sunday's leftovers, or canned meat plus veg stretched the portion to feed more mouths. The name itself changes regionally: panagi, panacelty, but the core remains the same. It was not glamorous, but it was dependable. A vessel of baked potatoes and onions absorbing every drop of meaty gravy, heat retained in its thick layers. Served straight from the dish with a ladle, it was a dinner that said, "We'll manage." This was winter in Britain before microwaves and chilling convenience redefined the kitchen. In Scotland, stovies were the weekday answer to a Sunday roast. Cubed or sliced potatoes, onions, and often leftover meat or dripping would stew slowly together with a little liquid until the potatoes broke down and the flavors merged. The term comes from the Scots verb to stove, meaning to stew or braise, a hint at how the dish rose from thrift and necessity. In a 1970s winter, when heating bills soared and families sought warmth not only from fuel but from food, stovies hit the mark: cheap, hot, porridge-like in its comfort and filling. You might find it served with pickled beetroot or oatcakes on the side. The beauty lay in simplicity. What was left from Sunday got turned into Monday's dinner, the stove stayed low, and the pot warmed the room. With cold terraces and draughty kitchens, stoveys brought resistance to the winter freeze. One spoonful a statement that hunger wouldn't win. Scotch broth, sometimes misleadingly called a broth, is a dense, hearty soup of barley, or other cereal grain, root vegetables, and stewing cuts of lamb, mutton, or beef. In Scottish homes, especially during the long winter, it provided sustenance and warmth with modest ingredients. Historical cookbooks from the 18th century already document its existence. In the 1970s, with grocery budgets squeezed and fuel rationing still a memory, Scotch broth offered everything in one pot. The grain delivered slow energy, the meat and vegetables offered flavor and nutrition, and the whole thing simmered for hours while the household carried on. Served portions were generous, leftovers kept for the next day only deepened the flavor. When coupled with thick bread or oat cakes, it was a full meal that didn't rely on a perfect roast. On cold nights, a big bowl of Scotch broth meant the central heating could be turned down and the kettle might stay off a little longer. When you pulled down the lid on the pot after hours of cooking, the fragrance of leeks, chicken stock, sometimes old bird, and subtle sweetness of prunes filled the kitchen. That was Cock-a-leekie soup, a Scottish winter classic with origins in the 16th century. In a decade where Britain was still mindful of waste and making do, cock-a-leekie was a go-to. The chicken stretched across several meals, the barley or rice added bulk, and the leeks added flavor without cost. A family could open the door to the kitchen at dusk and find the soup bubbling quietly, the pot lid steaming, and the room warming slowly. It suited the winter as much as any radiator. Served with thick, crusty bread, it was the kind of dinner that satisfied hunger and softened the cold. The name might sound whimsical today, but for many households it carried the comfort that only a warm bowl of homemade soup can. Cawl has been called the national dish of Wales, and for good reason. It was hearty, honest food built for long winters and longer days, traditionally made with lamb or beef, potatoes, carrots, swede, and leeks. It was the sort of stew that fed families for days on end. In the 1970s, when money and heating were tight, cawl's beauty was its endurance. The broth served on day one, and the tender meat and vegetables eaten the next, stretched from a single joint. The pot would bubble slowly on the range, filling the kitchen with a scent that felt like warmth itself. Every Welsh household had its version, some thick like stew, others clear and soupy, but all were designed to make little go far. The dish wasn't just nourishment, it was comfort, community, and thrift in one. On stormy nights, with coal rationed and lights dimmed, cawl reminded families that even the simplest ingredients could still taste like home. Few dishes sum up northern thrift quite like peas pudding. Made from dried split peas boiled with a ham joint or bone, it was thick, hearty, and cheap to prepare. Once cooked, the pudding set into a golden paste that could be spooned hot beside the ham, or, once cooled, sliced into sandwiches for the next day. Peas pudding hot, peas pudding cold, the old rhyme went. And that was exactly how families in the Northeast lived through the 1970s winters. It was fuel efficient, high in protein, and made from ingredients that could sit in the pantry for weeks. Housewives often kept a pudding simmering gently on the hob while the ham cooked, letting the residual heat thicken it slowly. A spoonful of mustard or vinegar on the side lifted its humble flavor. When meat was scarce, the pudding alone, seasoned with salt and pepper, became the main course. It was honest, frugal food that kept the cold from biting too deep. In homes across Britain, the sound of a simmering pot meant something was being stretched. Split pea and ham bone soup was the perfect example. Starting with dried peas, a chopped onion, and whatever ham bone was left from Sunday, The pot would sit on the back of the stove all week, replenished with water, thickened with more peas, and stirred into new life every evening. The broth turned rich and smoky, the peas breaking down into a creamy texture that filled bellies and warmed fingers. In the 1970s, this bottomless pot was a winter ritual. It required little fuel, used scraps most would throw away, and provided steady meals for families scraping through tough weeks. The soup wasn't fancy, but it was deeply satisfying, a reminder that resourcefulness could make magic from leftovers. Served with doorstep bread and butter, it became more than food. It was proof of endurance, bubbling quietly as the outside world froze. For working-class families across Scotland and the north, mince and tatties wasn't just dinner. It was survival. Ground beef cooked down with onions, a splash of stock, and thickened gravy formed the foundation, ladled generously over boiled potatoes. It was fast, cheap, and filling, the holy trinity of 70s winter cooking. Every household had its version. Some added carrots or peas for colour, others swore by Worcestershire sauce or oxo cubes to deepen the flavour. The smell of browning mince on the hob was as familiar as the sound of coal crackling in the grate. Kids grew up on it, coming home from icy playgrounds to steaming plates that defrosted their hands. Even as inflation soared and wages froze, mince and tatties stayed within reach. A pound of mince could stretch across several days. Simple, nourishing, and never wasted, it was the kind of food that defined the era. Humble, homemade, and far better than it had any right to be. Few dishes were as comforting, or as economical, as cottage pie and shepherd's pie. Both were born from leftovers, beef or lamb from Sunday's roast, minced up and baked beneath a thick layer of mashed potato insulation. In the 1970s, when cuts were common and money was tight, this dish was a lifesaver. The filling could be cooked ahead of time and reheated quickly during short bursts of electricity. The potato topping trapped the heat, keeping it warm for hours even after the oven went cold. Families often bulked it out with carrots, onions, or baked beans to stretch the mince further. The golden crisped crust became the prize of the pan, a reward for thrift. Served with frozen peas or leftover gravy, it was the very picture of British resourcefulness. Cottage pie fed the body, shepherd's pie fed the spirit. They were proof that comfort didn't need luxury, just a bit of leftover meat and a hot oven. If there was one tin that defined the 1970s pantry, it was corned beef. Cheap, long-lasting, and endlessly adaptable, it was the backbone of countless winter meals, and none more beloved than corned beef hash. Chopped potatoes, onions, and cubes of the pink, salty meat fried together into a crisp, golden hash that smelled of comfort and economy. It was hot, hearty, and could be made entirely from store-cupboard staples when fresh meat was out of reach. Some families baked it in the oven to save fuel, others fried it fast in a single pan. Either way, it filled the house with warmth. Served with a fried egg on top or a dollop of brown sauce, it was pure British grit on a plate. During power cuts or 3-day weeks, tinned corned beef was security, a guarantee of dinner no matter what. Hash wasn't glamorous, but it kept families fed and spirits steady when the nights felt endless and cold. Before avocado toast and fancy brunch plates, there were Pilchards. Big tins of Cornish Pilchards or sardines in tomato sauce were a fixture in the 1970s pantry. Cheap, filling, and packed with oil, they were the working family's answer to a fast, hot meal. Your mum or nan would tip them onto toast or bread, slide them under the grill, and within minutes the kitchen smelled like the seaside, smoky, tangy, and rich. The tomato sauce soaked into the bread, turning it soft in the middle and crisp at the edges. Sometimes a splash of vinegar or a sprinkle of black pepper topped it off. For a few pennies, you got protein, heat, and comfort on a plate. Children wrinkled their noses. Adults called it proper food. It was a classic of cold nights and tight budgets. Humble, nostalgic, and unpretentious. Today it's vanished from most dinner tables, but for those who lived it, that smell of sizzling Pilchards meant home. Kippers were the aroma of British mornings before the era of cereal boxes and pop-up toasters. Smoked herring, split open and salted before drying over smouldering wood, they carried a powerful scent that lingered through the house. 1 part comfort, 1 part complaint. In the 1970s, they were still a cheap source of protein, especially in coastal regions where fresh fish was scarce or expensive. A single kipper, grilled and served with bread and butter, was enough to start the day with warmth. The oil shimmered, the edges crisped, and the flesh flaked apart, rich with smoky depth. Housewives loved them because they were quick to cook and easy on the purse. Kids sometimes hated them for the smell that clung to the curtains. Still, on freezing winter mornings, few things matched that first mouthful of salty, smoky fish. It was Britain's original energy breakfast, fuel for miners, dockers, and anyone tough enough to face another cold day. Nothing said winter like a steaming bowl of porridge, thick enough to stand a spoon upright. Oats were the backbone of British breakfasts through the 1970s. Cheap, filling, and slow-burning enough to keep hunger away till midday. Mothers stirred the pot on gas hobs or over coal ranges, the smell of oats and milk rising like comfort itself. But it was the swirl of golden syrup that turned it into something special, a sticky ribbon of sweetness melting into the creamy surface. For many children, that amber glow on top of porridge was warmth in winter form. Families ate it, huddled in dressing gowns, kitchen windows fogged from the heat of the stove. No electric gadgets, no instant packets, just oats, milk, patience, and love. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest food, cheap energy for cold mornings and long walks to school. That humble bowl of porridge kept Britain's families fueled when money was thin and frost covered the glass. It might be the most British meal ever invented. Beans on toast, cheap, hot, and ready in minutes. By the 1970s, a tin of Heinz baked beans was more than a convenience food. It was a cultural institution. In an age of strikes, blackouts, and inflation, it represented certainty. The guarantee of a hot meal even when everything else failed. A slice of toast, a tin of beans, and maybe a sprinkle of grated cheese could feed an entire family for pennies. The sauce was tangy and sweet, the beans soft and filling. Kids adored it, parents relied on it, and no one cared about presentation. It was fast, affordable, and comforting. All the things Britain needed in a decade defined by shortages. Whether eaten by candlelight during power cuts or as a midnight snack after the pub, beans on toast united rich and poor alike. It wasn't fancy. It was survival, spooned straight from the tin. Faggots were the hidden heart of British comfort food. Rich, savoury meatballs made from offal, breadcrumbs and herbs, baked in thick onion gravy. Born in the Black Country and South Wales, they were a thrifty cook's answer to expensive cuts of meat. In the 1970s, when wages struggled to match the cost of living, faggots filled bellies and warmed homes. Your nan would make them from liver and pork trimmings, shaping them by hand and baking them until tender. Served with mashed potatoes and peas, they were pure working-class luxury. The gravy soaked into the mash, the smell of sage and onions filled the kitchen, and no one left the table hungry. You could still buy frozen faggots in boxes by companies like Mr. Brains, a British classic that kept its place in fridges for decades. Though less common today, the memory of that hearty, humble meal remains. Honest food for honest times. Few meals divided households like liver and onions. For some, it was the ultimate comfort, rich, iron-packed, and covered in thick brown gravy. For others, the smell alone was too much to bear. But in the 1970s, when meat prices soared, liver was one of the few affordable sources of protein. Families fried it quickly in dripping, letting the onions caramelize in the same pan until the kitchen filled with that unmistakable aroma, sharp, sweet, and hearty. Served with mashed potatoes and peas, it was weeknight medicine for bodies worn by cold and work. Mothers said it put color in your cheeks. And doctors agreed. It was packed with nutrients when vitamins were scarce. Some soaked it in milk first to soften the taste, others smothered it in gravy until it melted. Love it or hate it, liver and onions was winter on a plate. Proof that the toughest cuts could still make a family meal worth remembering. Few things symbolized winter comfort like suet dumplings. Just flour, suet, a pinch of salt, and a splash of water. That was all it took to stretch a thin stew into a full meal. Housewives would roll the dough into soft balls and drop them into bubbling pots of broth or gravy, where they swelled and steamed into fluffy, doughy clouds. When meat was scarce and the heating barely worked, suet dumplings stuck to your ribs in the best possible way. They were filling, warm, and simple, the kind of food that didn't need a recipe, just instinct. In the 1970s, when radiators went cold and ovens were used sparingly, the dumpling became a quiet hero. A few spoonfuls of flour and fat turned scraps of stew into a feast. They weren't fancy, just pure, hearty survival disguised as comfort. Every mouthful felt like warmth itself, the edible version of wrapping yourself in a blanket by the fire. The sweet smell of bread and butter pudding was the scent of thrift turned into luxury. It began with old bread, never wasted, sliced thin, buttered, and layered with raisins or jam before being drenched in a mix of milk, eggs, and sugar. Baked slowly, it emerged golden on top and soft beneath, a dessert that could feed an entire family for pennies. In the 1970s, when money was short and every crumb counted, this pudding was a weekly ritual. Housewives could heat the oven once, often right after cooking the main meal, and use the leftover warmth to bake it. The result was humble but rich, the custard soaking into the bread until every bite tasted like comfort. Children fought for the crispy edges, adults for the soft middle. It was the perfect answer to cold kitchens and long nights, a dessert born from nothing, made with care, and remembered with love. Treacle sponge pudding was more than dessert. It was morale in a dish. Sticky, sweet, and steaming, it filled the house with warmth on nights when the cold seeped through every crack. Made from flour, eggs, and golden syrup or black treacle, it was steamed for hours in a basin until light and spongy, the syrup pooling at the bottom like liquid gold. In the 1970s, when winters were bitter and heating costly, this pudding did double duty. It fed the family and warmed the kitchen. A spoonful of hot custard poured over the top turned it into the highlight of the week. It was cheap to make, simple to prepare, and guaranteed to lift spirits. Even the name Treacle sponge carried comfort, nostalgic, homely, unapologetically British. It was proof that you didn't need luxury to feel rich, just a bit of sweetness and steam. In Yorkshire and across the north, Parkin wasn't just cake. It was tradition. A sticky, dark blend of oatmeal, ginger, syrup, and treacle. It was baked once, then left to rest for days to grow even richer. Families made big slabs of it in November for bonfire night, but through the 1970s, it remained a winter staple. It kept for weeks, traveled well in lunchboxes, and offered slow, burning energy during long, cold days. Its warm spice and dense texture made it the perfect antidote to bleak weather and empty cupboards. A slice with butter and a mug of tea was all anyone needed after trudging home through rain and wind. Parkin was the kind of food that connected generations. Your nan's recipe, your mum's tin, your own memories of that gingery aroma. It wasn't about indulgence, it was about endurance, sweetness, and the quiet satisfaction of something homemade and strong enough to last. When central heating failed and the nights grew colder than the wallpaper, Britain turned to a cup of comfort. Bovril. Just a teaspoon of the dark, salty beef extract stirred into hot water created what everyone called beef tea. It wasn't quite soup and not quite drink, but it was pure warmth in a mug. Marmite served the same purpose, yeasty, savory, and brimming with umami before the word even existed. In the 1970s, mugs of Bovril were a common sight on terraces and in living rooms. People clutched them like hand warmers at football matches or during late-night TV by candlelight. The smell alone was enough to thaw frozen fingers. It was cheap, instant energy, and somehow emotional too. When the cupboards were bare, Bovril meant you could still have something hot and sustaining. It was Britain's winter lifeline in liquid form. Simple, salty, and unforgettable. Before bedtime, every child and grandparent knew the same ritual, a steaming mug of Horlicks or Ovaltine. Malty, creamy, and sweet, it wasn't just a drink. It was a hug in liquid form. At the height of the 1973-74 energy crisis, Britain learned what making do really meant. Power cuts plunged homes into darkness, and families cooked when the meter allowed, often by candlelight, always with care. The make-do stew was the decade's ultimate survival meal. Whatever root vegetables, cheap cuts, and dried pulses were on hand went into the pot, thickened by potatoes, and finished with suet dumplings that stretched the meal to feed everyone. The stew bubbled gently, filling cold terraces with warmth and the smell of perseverance. Leftovers became next-day lunches, bones became broth. It was food born from hard times, but it carried the heart of community. Neighbors sharing ingredients, families gathering close around the one warm space in the house. That humble stew represented more than thrift. It was solidarity in a spoon. In the bleakest winters of the 1970s, it wasn't just dinner. It was how Britain kept going. If this brought back memories of fogged-up windows, steaming kitchens. Number 2. Horlicks and Ovaltine. Before bedtime, every child and grandparent knew the same ritual. A steaming mug of Horlicks or Ovaltine. Malty, creamy, and sweet. It wasn't just a drink. It was a hug in liquid form. These powdered mixes were made from malted barley and milk solids, whisked into hot milk until frothy and golden. In the chill of the 1970s, they stood in for central heating, soothing, affordable, and deeply comforting. The smell alone, toasty and warm, could calm even the coldest hands. Mothers swore by it for helping children sleep through freezing nights. Older folks said it kept your bones from aching. There was no caffeine, no rush, just warmth and quiet. In homes with rattling windows and wool blankets, Horlicks and Ovaltine were small luxuries that didn't feel small at all. A bedtime mug by the fire was the final ritual of winter, a simple moment of peace before the lights went out. At the height of the 1973-74 energy crisis, Britain learned what making do really meant. Power cuts plunged homes into darkness, and families cooked when the meter allowed, often by candlelight, always with care. The make-do stew was the decade's ultimate survival meal. Whatever root vegetables, cheap cuts, and dried pulses were on hand went into the pot, thickened by potatoes and finished with suet dumplings that stretched the meal to feed everyone. The stew bubbled gently, filling cold terraces with warmth and the smell of perseverance. Leftovers became next-day lunches. Bones became broth. It was food born from hard times, but it carried the heart of community. Neighbors sharing ingredients, families gathering close around the one warm space in the house. That humble stew represented more than thrift. It was solidarity in a spoon. In the bleakest winters of the 1970s, it wasn't just dinner. It was how Britain kept going. If this brought back memories of fogged-up windows, steaming kitchens, and the smell of gravy on a Sunday, make sure to subscribe. And tell us in the comments which of these dishes takes you straight back to those good old days.